This podcast intro, songs AI. It's on YouTube and Spotify. You can use your ears or use your eyes. It's 30 minutes randomized.
Welcome back to another episode of 30 Minutes Randomized. I am here with one of the cool guys, one of the good ones, someone who I reached out to a couple years ago because I liked his tattoos and I had to say something over LinkedIn. It's Dan Otap. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. It's good to see you.
Yeah, likewise, for sure. Dan, before we get into the Wheel O questions, can you just share for people where you work and what you do there so they have a little context for your answers?
I work at Genentech, the birthplace of Biotech. It is a sponsor company, and I'm an alliance and partnerships director there. I was recently moved around. I was a principal lead for a while, and I've now been promoted and kind of moved into a director role.
Congrats on the recent promotion. And there is a question on the wheel, so we will hopefully talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I'm going to share the wheel. I'm going to click the button. For those of you who don't know, these questions are preloaded, but they're coming up in a random order. All right. This is a corporate icebreaker question, but a little bit of an unhinged one. What is the least impressive thing that you are secretly proud of?
I have two. One, because it no longer exists. I can rip a phone book, but I can rip like a full size like phone book from like Richmond, Virginia, like this thick. They don't exist anymore because phone books don't exist. I haven't seen one, but I remember when I was 18, I ripped one in Boston airport because I was bored. And then I broke 15 paver bricks with my forehead. So they're least impressive, but I'm secretly proud of that. But after the 15 bricks that I broke with my forehead at a show, a gentleman pulled me aside and said, "You're too damn smart, and you gotta use your head for other things." So I was like, "All right, I'll listen to that."
Wow, the rare admonishment that works.
It keeps
both
you
physically and as a metaphor. Man, those things are both actually super impressive to me. So I shout out to you if you've got a list of accomplishments where those are ranking as least impressive, but I think they're very cool. And also probably rest of your life, no problem with the pickle jar.
No. But if there's a bug in the kitchen, I'm screaming for Isla, my wife. But if there's a jar that needs to be opened, we're a very good dynamic duo.
You know, long-lasting relationships have a distribution of labor that both parties agree to, and that sounds really fair to me. I'm the bug guy in our house.
Rolling, man. So,
all right. You wrote a series on LinkedIn called Lessons from the Woodpile that I really appreciated about kind of growing up rural and having to prepare firewood for your family home that had a wood burning stove. One of those contained this nugget, which I really enjoyed. It was talking about you need to anticipate downstream effects from today's decisions. And I'm wondering if you had, when you were writing that or since then, any concrete examples you can share where that kind of showed up in clinical research for you?
Yeah. It actually, it's something that I think still shows up. And I think that sponsors, again, today I'm coming to you as basically Dan Otap. I'm not representing a company. I'm not representing but I got to say that one that rings true that was in the back of my head when I was writing it was protocol development. And the irony is I was just in a really deep, robust discussion this week with somebody about this, where my company is looking at that very process of how do we get site and investigator feedback early on as we're drafting these protocols that we send out. There's nuances there, right? Because what works in the US may or may not work in the EU. Same difference for Asia Pac, but regardless, it's getting the feedback. So when we have people authoring the studies, I mean, what's actually which is a little bit devastating is the data that was released by Ken Getz's team on protocol acuity and complexity. Mm-hmm. Because a few years ago, I don't know if it was 5+, the data was released and it showed pretty air apparent that protocols are just getting more and more complex. And that burden is continuing to raise for sites. You would think that would be the canary in the coal mine moment. I mean, when Ken Getz speaks, it's kind of like Moses, like you listen. Because his team is just so solid and strong with this stuff. And I would have thought that a follow-up from that, you would see the curve start to go in another direction. And unfortunately, it was either last year or a little bit over 18 months or so that his team released another paper. And sure enough, and I think it was actually in conjunction with the SCRS, but the trend continues to hockey stick. The reason I'm bringing this up is that's an exact direct example of what I mean by you have to anticipate downstream effects, because we don't know what we don't know. Some of us have been doing research for years, so we may think that we know everything, but we both know the smartest person in the room is the one that knows they're not the smartest person in the room and is willing to listen. And I think when it comes to protocol development, like that really hits front and center with anticipate what's coming. And the only way you can do that is by bringing in third parties and others that are in the day-to-day in the clinic, that are running the 18-hour PKs, that are follow the science wants to do. And we want this Cmax curve or anything. And it's going to be, we want to pack in as much data acquisition as possible early on because of seamless drug development. And there's good reason for it. And there's scientific rigor and there's robustness, but we sometimes inadvertently miss the forest for the trees to where we're creating an environment of massive burden, not only on the patient or the participant, but also on the coordinators, the nursing staff, data coordinators. And that is an example of what I mean by we need to be very mindful and anticipate the downstream effects, because we may be thinking, and we as in sponsors may be thinking with the best of intentions, with speed in mind and scientific rigor in mind, but do we really need all those things? And the answer might be, yeah, we do need those. We work in a very complex industry and some things are just needed, right? But to finish my thought, because I could ramble on this all day long, clearly, getting upstream, like the Dan Heath book, Upstream, I love that book, really teaches us about like trying to plan for the future and figure out what things, if possible, can be ironed out earlier on so that we don't have to do multi-million-dollar amendments down the road and belabor a process that takes long enough to begin with. I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah,
but
no, that's really good. I think the like, hey, are we sure about this? Like gut check, getting feedback from people who are real clinicians or real patients makes sense. I don't know. I don't necessarily have a question. You mentioned and you alluded to sometimes we are handcuffed. Like it does need to be this complex. Like do you have a sense of where that slider is, where like one end it's the regulatory agencies and they're saying it's got to be like this, and the other end is like really overambitious scientists being like, but we could get more data.
Yeah.
Where's that slider right now, do you think?
I think it's actually right in the middle, because there are examples where I see, and it's not just one company, it's every company with seamless drug development. Again, you're seeing a lot of people trying their best to front load as much data acquisition as possible. Like gone are the days of phase 1, 2, 3, 4. That's done, right? Like now it's a 1A, 1B, which rolls into a phase 2. And then you use that data as partial registrational, and then you move into a phase 3. So there's no more like, you see examples of the gold standard of like 2 randomized clinical trials that are very large registrational phase 3s, but that's not our reality anymore. And time is money. And so I see where this happens on both fronts, where you have scientists as well as even clinical operations teams pushing the needle and maybe trying to include as much as possible. But then you also have scenarios of like, depends on the molecule. I deal predominantly in early phase. There are molecules and modalities that are very novel and new, and we don't know what we don't know. So then safety is paramount, right? Like that's, we can't lose sight of that. Even with like these efforts going on in the FDA with like Project Trailblazer, et cetera, like you never can lose sight of scientific rigor, but then also safety, right? I mean, it goes back to the Belmont report. So you see on both the sponsor side or the medical writer side, but then you have some reviewers on health authority sides. And I've been on IND submissions where Things like safety, 24-hour hospitalization, 48-hour hospitalization. The sites might look at that and say, well, why do we need that for a bispecific? Because we've seen 60 bispecifics. Like, what's going on? Our hands are tied sometimes with that because depending on the reviewers may say, sure, we've seen 60 bispecs, but looking at the con meds of this molecule and the preclinical data, you guys still, in the very least, in the safety run-in, have to do 48 hours in hospital. Like, or gene therapy with like 28-day kind of reviews. Like, there's some of these things that it's constantly that push and pull. It's a little bit of Simone's maxims. And I think that right now, what's nice is we're actually kind of in a weird sort of middle where you've got really brilliant minds on both the regulatory authority sides with really good intentions and then also willing to take some risks, like using Bayesian statistics, like single dosing cohorts, like these things that are like kind of novel. And then you also have scientists that are trying to push the envelope. And I think that both sides at times have both wins and both sides have really risk averse reticence. And that I think is the reality that we live in, and actually what makes our jobs and our industry kind of fascinating, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, fair play. I'm just over here like kind of weeping because you keep referencing things that I don't totally understand or know. But I think on the whole, like that that's really good. Thank you for the summarization. I will say that when the FDA put the Bayesian statistics like guideline out, I went and tried to like understand what it meant. I spent like 2 straight days between Wikipedia and ChatGPT, and I don't think I really got there. So after this call, maybe you can take me to Bayesian statistics class. We are going back to the wheel, Doom. All right. So we mentioned this at the top of the show. You got promoted to Alliance and Partnership Director. I looked back at your titles at Genentech, and they've all kind of been this alliance and partnership thing. So what is that there? What does that role do there?
So full transparency, my leadership actually did a reorg. So okay. My title changed. My leveling is the same, but my title changed to director. I was a lead for a number of years. And in a nutshell, alliance and partnerships, at least in my scope of influence, really focuses on predominantly 2 things. One, site relations. And then since we work at a global company, Genentech is a member company of Roche. Since we work in a global company, we have international affiliate offices. So my focus is both site level engagement globally and partnering with I work at a pretty big company of about 100,000 plus employees. And I meet with fascinating people from Brazil. I meet with wonderful teams from Canada, EU, Asia Pac, etc. And my role, since we're early phase, we're a little bit of a smaller unit, about 100 plus strong of ClinOps people. My role, and I am part of a very small but mighty team, predominantly is focused on looking at strategy and the different types of modalities and methods to engage sites, whether it's clinical trial specific needs, like we have a lung cancer study that we need to activate, or broad stroke relationship management. And same thing, we're very firm believers, and the leadership has had this in their minds for years. And we've had pretty consistent leadership in GRED, which is Genentech Research and Early Development. They have prioritized relationship management, both internal and external to the company. So basically I sit in a very unique role, and I know other companies have many roles like this. But for me, you're right. Since day one, I've been in alliance and partnerships that ranges from being a director of an early phase oncology site network alliance to having to be a point of contact for the Americas across disease. So basically I started out in onc, and then it kind of branched out to different indications. So it ranges. And now with the reorg and title changes, I'm now formally a director. But I still am a number 2. I'm actually a better number 2 than a number 1. So I like to be Robin to a Batman. Shout out to Mitch on the Batman reference. But yeah, that's basically what my day involves.
Cool. I'm curious, and I don't know if you're allowed to answer this, but do you guys operate through CROs when you run your trials?
Our company does a myriad of both. So,
Okay.
I mean, without going into full blown details, I think there's a mixture of both, and we absolutely partner very closely with a lot of CRO partners. I have a lot of good friends and colleagues that are PMs and other things at those companies. And what's interesting is it also varies across. We have a couple different business units for clinical
Sure.
operations, right? So
Yeah.
early phase, late phase, et cetera. So different needs are met. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, I just remember I was at a conference somewhere, someplace, and there was like two sponsors, and one of them was they were like everything was through CROs, and the other was completely in-source. They did everything, and one was like, "Well, sites really they don't love us, they hate us," and the other guy was like, "Oh, we've never had a problem with sites, they love us," and I was like, I can spot the difference here. I think it's really cool that so much priority has been given to kind of maintaining the relationships with the sites. Like I think from my view that's not necessarily where the power resides, but like obviously they're the engine driving this entire thing. And if we
Absolutely.
can't figure out how to resource them well, then everybody's just simultaneously shooting ourselves in the foot, and it doesn't make
Yeah.
any sense. So,
And there's an analogy that's been given about drug development where drug development as a whole is an arrow, right? So think of an archery arrow, and the tip of that spear are the investigators. And then different iterations, it makes sense because they're the ones that are really leading the way in the clinic and providing. But then the full length of the arrow is basically the CTO administrators, the coordinators like guiding, and then the sponsors and the medical writers are the feathers in the arrow to kind of guide the show. Um, I am a full believer that you can't be successful in this industry without prioritizing the needs of the sites. Um, Drug companies really like to talk in general. Again, this is my opinion. Really like to talk in general about like market and having something brought to market and their customer as a patient. Um, Laura O'Donnell mentioned on a podcast a couple years ago that she likened, and there's an analogy, and I think she's now at GSK. She was at Genentech when I first arrived. Um, she did an analogy to where the customers of drug companies predominantly are patients when the drug's marketed. But when you're in clinical trials, the customer is the site and the investigators because they're not only your partner, but they're your customer. And as a sponsor, our job is to provide the best business. And it's not a simple statement like, let's just make this easy for everybody. Because again, going back to what I told you before, like we work in a ridiculously complex and regimented industry. So it's not going to be easy, but it can be streamlined as best as possible. And if we keep that as a North Star, then I think everybody benefits. So yeah.
really appreciate that. All right, we are making our way through the wheel. All right. Don't reflect on this too much. What's a trade-off that our industry consistently gets wrong? They take too much of this, or they give up this because they think they need that.
Hmm.
I can give you my answer if you need to think.
Please do, because I am thinking a little bit. But give me your
Sure.
answer.
So I think there is almost always the trade-off of possibility for experience. Whether that's in hiring, in picking vendors, in design, because everything's so heavily regulated, and it's like, well, we know how to get this across the FDA finish line, or we know there's just constantly this emphasis on have you done it before, which I really appreciate and think is good, but it's almost never tempered with like, oh, maybe someone from outside or with a different point of view could try this. I felt frustration in the job market from people, frustration in the vendor market, that there's just a seeming reticence to ever kind of put the toe across the line and give people their first shots on goal. And the trade-off, I think, is not necessarily innovation, because there's plenty of VC-backed companies for that.
Yeah.
But the idea of possibility, the unknown, is traded off for experience all the time.
I'm not going to take the easy answer and say +1, but I will say that the only reason that I sit in the chair that I sit in is somebody took a chance on me for research. Like I was selling TVs at Best Buy before Kristen Herman hired me at Sloan Kettering, and she took
I'd
a
buy
shot.
a TV from you.
I had one tie to my name, right? Like my claim to fame at that point was selling Alec Baldwin a 32-inch plasma TV. And I was applying for a research job. So somebody took a shot on me. So I would say, I'm not taking the easy answer and saying +1, but I am telling you I resonate with what you say. And I'm actually a firm believer in that. And when I've had the opportunity of being a hiring manager, sometimes that's a joy. Sometimes that's suboptimally to a joy. Um, I would like to say firmly in my heart of hearts, I've been willing to take shots on people where you can see like, all right, so the trade-offs that I think of in our industry, the trade-offs right now, I feel like we're trying on a topic that's been kicking around for a number of years, and that's kind of how our industry works. But the tech burden, and we haven't broken it yet. We haven't figured it out yet. There's still multiple logins, and there are laudable efforts going on with ExoStar and these other types of companies to do kind of like single sign-on. But I still feel like we have an opportunity there. But yet, even though we know tech burden is an issue, I have not seen us slow down on bringing in new vendors or bringing in new tech solutions. So there's got to be some way of like that trade-off of innovation that you say, which makes this place so brilliant and our work so brilliant. There's still a trade-off of like, how are we missing the mark where we still are inundating sites, coordinators? I mean, I made an analogy, I think 4 or 5 years ago, that coordinators now had to be Apple bar genius tech people as well, right? That was 4 or 5 years ago. And I still remember probably one of the most impactful presentations that I've seen in clinical trials with Brad Hightower, where he was just stacking those devices,
Yeah.
right?
It's so good.
Agreed. I mean, the guy's a legend, but I don't think we've cracked it yet. I will say that we have very smart minds trying to solve that. Like I believe in that, but we still seem to be inundating, and there's got to be some, not common ground, but I'm rooting for the companies that are trying to really hit that on the head.
Well, I'm working on seed funding for my startup that implants a chip in all of the study coordinators' heads, and they can just think their way through the trial. It's going to be pretty cool. So,
all right.
All right. Please, no one take me seriously. All right. What are the warning signs that someone somewhere in operations has mistaken site management for site engagement?
Ooh.
Or are there warning signs? Like, where does that show up when this happens?
This is what I like. You ask really good questions. I was talking with my wife actually about this, ironically, because yes, I'm a nerd and we talk about work. Site engagement and site management, in my opinion, in the seat that I sit in, it is very much conflated at times, where site engagement in clinical trials and sponsor relationship management is more of a macro culture, and site management, i.e. study management, is much more of a micro culture, right? And the warning signs are pretty clear as day when you have, and you see this in companies go in peaks and troughs of even the way they support and fund FTEs for these roles. Because right now you see roles that are popping up everywhere, and I have a theory on it, but we'll talk afterward. But you see these roles popping up as like liaisons or engagement leads, etc., right? And it seems to happen consistently across a bunch of companies at once. So then you kind of think like, what consultant's in whose ear and saying the same thing and getting paid? But I will digress a bit there because I don't want to be in hot water. But what I see is a huge warning sign is when we start focusing more predominantly on specific needs that are driven by a molecule or driven by a protocol, a specific protocol, as opposed to engaging a site holistically and saying, okay, not just on sponsor X, Y, and Z study, but across the board, what are your priorities? What are your hurdles? What are your day-to-day operational difficulties? So that as a sponsor, i.e. a business partner, we can do better. So it becomes very myopic. And that's when I
Yeah.
start seeing like, okay, we're now focusing a little bit more on the immediate needs of said molecule or said program. And we're jettisoning the larger discussion of this is the industry as a whole. And if you tweak this, maybe others might be able to tweak it the same way and help move the needle, which I hate that phrase, but
Needle's got to be moved sometimes.
yeah. So I don't know if my analogy or if my
No, that
explanation
makes
makes
total
sense.
sense. It feels like there's probably just a huge power vacuum towards that specific management. Get this done because everything feels like
And
it's
it
on
makes sense.
fire.
Correct.
Yeah.
It makes sense, right? Because that's where all the funding is. And we've read the papers, you know that on a good day, we have a 10% hit rate. That's it. Once you go into clinic, that means 90% of the molecules that go into clinic never make it to market. And then when you start looking at the money that's behind this and the R&D costs behind this, depending if you're looking at either JAMA or if you're looking at Tufts, it can range from 900 plus million per molecule for development and balloon, at least in oncology, to damn near 4.5 billion and 10 to 12 years on average. Like these things it makes sense that sometimes it gets so connected to a program because that's where the funding is. But it's hard to kind of thread the needle and do things that are in our industry sometimes referenced as above molecule or molecule enabling. Those are the programs that are both, to me, some of the most exciting, but in other respects, those are the ones that are probably the most at risk to get cut because when the rubber meets the road and you only have X amount of dollars and you have X, Y, and Z programs, you have to put it towards those programs. So it makes logical sense. It's just a watch out in my mind.
Yeah. Man, I want to dig in, but I also have two more questions.
Okay.
Thank you for that. That was really helpful. Everyone reach out to Dan if you want to learn more about engagement versus management. Okay. We've talked about this. Can you encapsulate your farmer's market story? And then I have a follow-up question based on that, but I
Okay.
need you to tell the story first.
And I am very verbose, so I'm going to try to make this super short and sweet. You and I talked probably about a year ago, and I had this idea that has not come to fruition. And that is a play on words because it was a farmer's market that sold a lot of fruit. The talk that we had is I was thinking, it was right around COVID. I thought that when COVID happened and the vaccines were pushed through, I forget what the program was, like light force or light speed. I forget what it was,
Light
right?
speed
But
sounds right.
monumental work was done in clinical trials, and there was media attention. And I thought, man, we're going to capitalize on this, and people are going to really kind of take in the fact that it's not just big pharma wanting to sell medications and keep people sick. Like there's a regimented process, et cetera. So clinical trials finally got its moment in the limelight for a good reason and not like a bad reason of like 3 people died on a first in human, right? I really was like optimistic. The cup was half full. It's not any longer. And people are still going back to, well, homeopathic, et cetera. And drug companies are just focused on making money and perpetuating things. And there's a farmer's market in Folsom. And if anybody, I live in Folsom. If you're a Johnny Cash fan, my wife and I ride the Johnny Cash bike trail. It's lovely. It's beautiful. But there's a farmer's market and there's a really good cookie vendor by the name of Cookie Boss. And you can Google her because she's been on, I think, the Food Network and done crazy things. But we've built a relationship over time. And you and I talked about this and you pointed this out to me. But I was thinking back, I think last summer or so, like, could I start an organic movement of just getting the question out there of what does the standard American in the US know about clinical trials, and lead with just one simple question, like what's your awareness of clinical trials, or what do clinical trials mean to you? We've seen a lot of papers on this. We've seen a lot of things like barriers of research, et cetera, but I wanted to be like so rudimentary and ask the farmer or ask the cookie vendor. And the reason is because I was in a conversation with this cookie vendor and they asked, like, what do you do? And I was like, well, I'm in clinical trials. And they were like, oh, but you're nice. And I was like, well, what do you mean? So I wanted to dig more because there's still that sentimentality of like big pharma, et cetera. And I was like, how powerful would it be to literally, and I was a hair's length away, and I don't know if I sent you my draft, but I was a hair's length away of blasting something out on something like LinkedIn saying, we're going to do this. I would have had to contact like some human subjects protection people contacts that I have to know if I could do this in a like a regimented way, but like start a grassroots movement of people. And I was just going to set up a table at a farm and that farmer's market down on Sutter Street in Folsom and have a sign, kind of like that meme sign, like something, something changed my mind or whatever, right?
Prove me wrong or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. And just ask a simple question on my free time, right? Like on the weekends, and just start asking, like, what do clinical trials mean to you? And then have others ask the same question and then curate that data. And then that become very much like a grassroots basic. This is the current state of affairs of knowledge of clinical trials in the US. And I have an inkling of what it might look like, but I was still fascinated to see it. And I think where I have not done it yet. So follow back up with me in a year. Maybe it takes me some time. But you pointed out that the reason that I felt connected with that vendors there was, and this goes back to my job actually, and what Genentech does with like sites. This is a long-term conversation. And that's the only reason that it was beneficial. And it's the only reason that that person was willing to even listen at that point, because, well, that or we buy a lot of sugar cookies that are good from them. But you know what I mean?
I think the thing that like got me so much was that she was shocked. She knew you and like had a favorable view of you. And there was a belief in her mind that caused good person and clinical trials to be incompatible.
And that's like what didn't sit well. You're right.
Yeah, that's, I mean, we know all the stats, like pharma's one of the least trusted industries, but like the research side of it, I thought and would have hoped had like a little bit of a better shine on it because of that. But like anytime you see it in media, it's always someone who, you know, in a movie or TV show is like, this is their last hope and they need to get in this clinical trial. And people mostly think, all right, so here's my question. And this is putting you on the spot a little. Do you think that everyone who works in the industry ought to consider themselves an ambassador for clinical research?
I think if we all took that mindset and we all embraced the beauty of what we're involved in, the easy answer to your question is yes.
Okay. And then another hard one that I didn't prep you for at all, so no thinking about it ahead of time. But if there's someone out there who's like, well, I want to be an ambassador, but I'm not as outgoing as you, Dan, or Steve, or whatever.
Yeah.
What does it look like practically for the average person who's in the industry, whether vendor, tech, site, sponsor, to do that proactively? Is there
you show up. You show up at your work and you do your damnedest and you put one foot in front of the other, and you are kind of like Gandalf told Frodo in Lord of the Rings, like you do the best that you can with the time you're given. You show up. And I've talked about this before, but I am a firm believer that literally, and we can call it an ecosystem, we could call it whatever. Every person's role in our industry is just as important. And whether it's a vendor, whether it's a sponsor, whether you're a program manager or you're a coordinator at a site or you're a nurse at a site, you show up. You bring your full self, just like Brene Brown teaches us. You show up and you do your darndest with what time you have, and you make as much impact, and you keep right-sized, right? The humility is a huge one here, but being an ambassador, in my opinion, is literally just doing the best that you can with what you're given. And I'm a big believer in karma, not to get spiritual here, but I really am. I'm a big believer. And I don't, it's not in any way, shape or form a stretch in my mind that somebody could be an ambassador for clinical trials by showing up wholeheartedly to the current job that they're in. And that will continue to compound. It's kind of like Warren Buffett teaches us about interest. Like it's going to compound over time, and it will continue to pay off, but it's just a matter of showing up. I mean, it's why you and I get up and go to our desks in the morning.
That's good. All right. I'm going to trust that the people are engaged, and we're going to go to the last one. It's a silly one and should only take like 2 seconds, but I like asking people this one because physical experiences matter in the world of AI. What was the last ticketed event you went to? So anything where you had to pay admission, movie, live music, show?
Okay. last ticketed event, my wife and I just went to see Moana live action over the weekend, and I loved it. And I don't
All
know
right.
how Rotten Tomatoes has it at like a 5 point something, because the animated version is at a 7 point something. And it was such a faithful retelling of the
Yeah.
original story.
All right.
And the acting was great. And I am a Disney fan, and we both loved it. So it was, I cried a bit, I laughed a lot, and it was a good time. Then we had
I'm
brunch afterwards.
guaranteed to cry at basically any movie I go to. Dan, thank you so much for joining me. This is really a pleasure. I appreciate your time.
Same here.
I haven't figured out
It's
how
a
to
pleasure.
close these yet, so I'm just gonna say, see you later. Hopefully at
Well,
SCRS in a couple
my
months.
idea to close for you is, I said this before we jumped on. Thank you for your time, and thank you for what you do. I think you bring an energy ever since we've met, like what, 3, 4, I don't know how many years ago. You have an authentic self. You bring it, just like I was just talking about bringing your whole self to it. That's what you do. And I'm very humbled to even be invited to talk on your pod. So thank you.
It's getting a little dusty in here, Dan. I'm gonna have to cut it off. All right.
Noted.
Thanks a lot, man. Talk soon. Bye.
See ya.
Randomized.
Thanks for listening to 30 Minutes Randomized. If you enjoyed the show, please feel free to like, subscribe, review, or share it with a friend. Until next time, I'm your host, Steve Wimmer, reminding you to stay random.